He came back to a bright northern lake town to sell worthless land and close the past for good. But his Malinois stopped cold at a patch of moss and stone, nose lifted, as if the ground itself was breathing. Under summer light, a hidden door slid open, revealing steel stairs and air too clean to belong to the forest. Below was not a cave, but a concrete corridor, blast doors, and a fortress that was never meant to be found. Then he found a man hiding in the dark with logs and maps that pointed straight to the town's water. A voice on the speakers called his name and offered an NDA, while a countdown began to lock the truth away. When you finish this story, tell us where you're watching from or what moment hit you the hardest. And please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subs so we can keep bringing you powerful new K9 and SEAL stories. Wyatt Halden came back to the north the way a man comes back to a place he never really left. Quietly, prepared, telling himself it was only business. The lake town looked bright enough to forgive anything. Summer light lingered late, turning the water into hammered silver and the pine shadows into long, gentle lines across the road. Festival flags were already being strung between street lamps, and someone was testing a microphone near the marina, the brief squeal of feedback swallowed by laughter and lake wind. Wyatt parked near the edge of his inherited property and stepped out wearing the same complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform he wore everywhere. Matching blouse and trousers properly fitted and fully buttoned, plain black belt, plain black combat boots, and nothing else. No helmet, no hat, no sunglasses, no eyewear, no tactical vest, no body armor, no gloves, no headset, no backpack, no weapon, no patches, no extra accessories. He carried himself upright with the calm, composed authority of someone trained to keep emotion behind the eyes. His face was angular and rugged, sharp jawline clean-shaven, the kind of geometry that looked carved rather than grown. His cold, blue-gray eyes stayed steady, watching without reacting. People often assumed steadiness meant comfort. Wyatt knew it usually meant control. Beside him, Vesper stepped down from the truck with the same disciplined economy. The Belgian Malinois was a full-grown male canine, 4 to 5 years old, lean and muscular without excess weight, deep fawn to mahogany coat with a distinct black facial mask that made his expression look permanently intense. Upright ears tracked every small sound. Dark amber eyes held an alert, obedient focus. The dog wore a tan tactical K9 vest and a simple working dog collar, standing steady and mission-ready, facing the same direction as Wyatt, as if the two of them shared a single attention. Wyatt had planned to sell the land quickly. Worthless, the attorney had said, like the word itself could close a chapter. He told himself he wanted clean endings. What he actually wanted was distance from anything that could reach back and grab him. The property wasn't much at a glance. A modest cabin near the tree line, a slope of mixed pine and birch, a patch of old stone that looked like every other patch of northern ground. He should have felt relief that the inheritance was simple. Instead, he felt a pressure behind his ribs, the same pressure he used to feel when something was wrong but hadn't shown its teeth yet. Leonard Baines had died 3 weeks earlier, a quiet passing that still felt too abrupt for a man who had always moved carefully. Leonard wasn't Wyatt's father, not even close, but he had been Wyatt's legal guardian during the years foster homes blurred together, an older county surveyor with tobacco-stained fingers and a habit of listening longer than he spoke. Leonard's kindness had never been loud, and that had unsettled Wyatt more than shouting ever did. Quiet men were harder to predict. Quiet men also remembered things. Wyatt had spent his adult life learning to bury memory under procedure. Now memory had come back as a deed and a set of keys. Inside the cabin, the air smelled faintly of old cedar and cold iron. Wyatt set a thin folder on the kitchen table and opened it with the same deliberate care he used on anything that mattered. The paperwork was straightforward on the surface. Parcel lines, county stamps, standard language that pretended the land was just land. But one line caught his eye because it didn't belong with the rest. An easement notation, a technical right-of-way, with no clear purpose listed. The ink looked older than the other entries, as if it had been copied forward out of habit. Wyatt read it twice, then a third time, irritation building in the familiar shape of a soldier's mind encountering an unnecessary variable. He did not like variables. Variables were where mistakes lived. Vesper paced the cabin once, not anxious, just focused, then stopped at the window facing the slope behind the cabin. The dog held still, ears upright, gaze fixed on the woods as if something out there had a pulse he could hear. Wyatt watched him for a long moment. "Easy," Wyatt murmured, not because he expected the dog to calm down, but because he needed to hear his own voice steady in the room. Vesper didn't bark. He rarely did. He simply remained angled toward the trees with a quiet certainty that tightened Wyatt's nerves more than any growl could have. Wyatt told himself it was just a canine habit, reading scent, reading air, reading disturbances that humans ignored. Yet there were no tire tracks in the dirt outside, no voices, no headlights moving through the pines. The forest was calm. Too calm. Late afternoon turned toward evening without drama. Wyatt walked the property line with the folder tucked under one arm and the kind of disciplined stride that made him look like he was still on a schedule even when he wasn't. He checked the cabin's foundation, the old shed, the edge of the slope where rock outcrops broke through soil. Vesper trotted ahead, then slowed, then stopped as if he had hit an invisible wall. The dog's body went rigid in one clean motion, head lifted, nostrils flaring, ears forward, tail low and steady. He stared at a patch of moss and stone near the base of the ridge. Nothing remarkable, nothing marked, nothing that would catch a casual eye. Wyatt followed his line of sight, expecting to see a burrow or a snake or some sign of wildlife. There was nothing. That was the problem. Vesper moved in a tight arc, nose hovering just above the moss, then returned to the same spot and froze again. The behavior wasn't random, and it wasn't curiosity. It was a refusal. The dog's posture said one thing with a force that made Wyatt's stomach tighten: do not walk away. Wyatt crouched and brushed his fingertips over the moss. Cool, damp, ordinary. He pressed his palm flat against the stone beneath and felt nothing at first. Then a faint temperature difference, subtle enough to be dismissed, but real enough that the skin on his hand noticed it. Cold where cold shouldn't be, like a breath held just under the surface. Wyatt withdrew his hand and watched Vesper. The dog's dark amber eyes flicked to Wyatt's face once, then back to the moss. Not asking permission, confirming a fact. Wyatt felt irritation rise. At the land, at the paperwork, at the way memory insisted on leaving fingerprints on his life. He had come here to reduce the past to a signature line. But Vesper's certainty pulled his attention into a shape he couldn't ignore. Wyatt stood, took 2 steps back, and looked at the slope with a broader focus, the way he looked at unfamiliar corridors. The moss patch sat near a scatter of stones that seemed too evenly placed, too natural, in the way stage things tried to be natural. He told himself he was overthinking. He told himself it was just a dog doing dog things. But Vesper did not move. He held the line like a sentry. Wyatt finally exhaled and returned to the cabin, not because he was done, but because he needed information before he let his instincts run wild. He searched drawers the way a man searches a room, methodical, respectful, impatient with clutter. In the back of a kitchen cabinet, he found an envelope wedged behind a stack of old county receipts. The paper was yellowed at the edges. The handwriting on the front was Leonard's, tight and slanted, the writing of a man who measured things for a living and couldn't help measuring language too. Inside was a single note written in black ink that had faded slightly but remained legible. If you sell this land, you sell the door. No explanation, no signature. Leonard had never been a man who begged. The sentence wasn't a plea. It was a warning from someone who had decided at some point that Wyatt would need it. Wyatt read it once, then again, and felt the strange mix of anger and ache that came whenever Leonard's presence returned. Wyatt had spent years convincing himself he didn't owe anyone anything. But Leonard had given him shelter when he'd been 13 and furious at the world, had given him silence when silence was safer than lectures, and now Leonard had given him a door without telling him where it was. Wyatt set the note down and stared at it until the words stopped being ink and started being weight. Outside, Vesper resumed pacing, slow, deliberate circles, then stopped at the north-facing window, ears forward. The dog was not anxious. He was tracking. Wyatt looked at the easement line in the paperwork again. Technical right-of-way, no listed purpose, the kind of thing that existed when something needed access without being seen. Wyatt's mind assembled possibilities like a soldier assembling gear. Old utility route, abandoned drainage, forgotten survey marker. None of it explained the note. None of it explained Vesper's refusal. Evening deepened. The town lights began to glow faintly beyond the trees, festival preparations turning into small pockets of brightness near the lake. Wyatt cooked nothing. He drank water and stared at the papers and listened to the cabin settle. Vesper ate quickly, then returned to the same tense watch, as if the dog didn't trust comfort. Wyatt lay down fully dressed and slept in fragments, waking at every small sound, his body acting on old training even though his mind insisted this wasn't a mission. The north stayed bright longer than it should have, and when darkness finally came, it felt thin and temporary. About a third of the way through the night, Vesper made a sound, barely a huff, not a bark, and stood at the cabin door, staring at it with a stillness that forced Wyatt to sit up. The dog looked back once, then nudged the door with his nose. Wyatt rose and followed without speaking. The porch boards creaked under his boots. Outside, the air was cool, the lake wind brushing the trees. Vesper led him toward the slope behind the cabin, moving with that controlled, quiet confidence that always made Wyatt feel as if the dog knew more than he should. They stopped at the moss patch. In the moonlight, it looked even more ordinary, and yet Vesper's posture hardened, as if the darkness had sharpened whatever he sensed. Wyatt crouched, hand hovering over the moss, and listened. At first, there was nothing but wind in pine needles. Then he caught it, faint, rhythmic, low. Not the forest, not water, a mechanical vibration so subtle it could be imagined, but too steady to be natural. Like a fan turning somewhere below earth, moving air through something sealed. Wyatt felt his pulse slow, rather than spike. Slow meant control. Control meant thinking. Vesper held perfectly still, ears erect, dark amber eyes fixed on the ground, breathing measured. The dog didn't fear the sound, he recognized it. Wyatt's mind flashed to Leonard again, quiet, stubborn, measuring lines on maps like they mattered more than money. If you sell this land, you sell the door. Wyatt exhaled slowly, then brushed the moss aside with careful fingers. The top layer came away damp and soft. Beneath it, the stone felt smoother than it should have, and along one edge his fingertips found a seam so thin it might have been a crack, except the seam ran too straight. A thin breath of cold air slid up through it, clean and dry, smelling faintly of metal and something like electricity. Wyatt froze. Vesper froze too, body rigid, ears snapped forward, not barking, not growling, just silently declaring the same truth he had declared all day. This is real, and it is not supposed to be here. Wyatt pulled his hand back and stared at the seam, his face unreadable in the moonlight. The past had not closed, and it had opened. Wyatt Halden woke to a northern morning that felt too clean to be trusted. The light in Maine did not so much arrive as settle, slow, pale gold spreading across the lake until every ripple looked like a thin sheet of metal. He stood on the porch in the same complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform he wore the day before, blouse and trousers fitted and fully buttoned, plain black belt, plain black combat boots, no extra gear hanging off him, no weapon, no patches, nothing ornamental, just discipline made visible. His angular, rugged face looked carved by weather and restraint, sharp jawline clean-shaven, cold blue-gray eyes steady in a way that didn't ask permission. Beside him, Vesper moved like a thought-given muscle, a full-grown male Belgian Malinois canine, 4 to 5 years old, lean and powerful without bulk, deep fawn to mahogany coat with a distinct black facial mask, upright ears and intense dark amber eyes that never wandered. The dog's tan tactical K9 vest fit snugly, a simple working dog collar sitting clean at his neck. No barking, no fuss, just that mission-ready quiet that could make an empty place feel like it was being watched back. Wyatt had promised himself he would keep it rational, confirm the property line, list the land, be gone, but the late Leonard Baines's note, old paper, old ink, old warning, sat in Wyatt's mind like a stone he couldn't swallow. He didn't repeat the words out loud. He didn't need to. Vesper had already repeated them in his own language yesterday. Stand here, breathe this air, don't leave. Wyatt drove into town for one thing he couldn't improvise with his bare hands, a long pry bar, because whatever lay beneath that patch of moss was not going to reveal itself to impatience. The town was already wearing its festival face. Someone was hanging flags along the main street. A flatbed trailer with a half-built stage sat outside the fire hall. The lakefront smelled like sunscreen, grilled onions, and pine. And Wyatt went into a hardware store that looked as if it had been assembled from 1,000 practical decisions. Behind the counter stood Royce Hennigan, a man in his early 60s with a broad chest softened by age, skin tanned and creased from winters and wind, salt and pepper hair cut short, and a gray goatee trimmed with the same care he gave his shelves. His eyes were a faded hazel that had seen enough to stop being impressed, but not enough to stop being kind. He spoke to Wyatt the way older men in small towns speak to someone they recognize as useful, plain, with respect, without theater. "You're the one up on Baines's old corner," Royce said, not a question. Wyatt nodded once, just looking. Royce studied Vesper, then Wyatt, then Vesper again. The dog stood facing the door as if he were guarding an invisible line. "That's a working animal," Royce said quietly. "Doesn't waste motion." When Wyatt asked about the ridge, anything old, anything buried, anything that didn't belong, Royce didn't laugh. His expression tightened a fraction, a memory passing through him like a shadow. He told Wyatt that Leonard Baines had been a county surveyor back when paper maps still decided lives, and that Leonard had once come in for rope and metal rings and a can of grease without explaining why. "Old drainage, old vents," Royce said, voice careful. "Folks call it leftover war stuff. Folks call a lot of things leftover so they can sleep." He slid the pry bar across the counter, then, without being asked, added a coil of thin rope and a small flashlight keychain Wyatt declined, so Royce only shrugged and kept his advice instead. "If you're going to poke something that's been buried on purpose," he said, "do it in daylight, and don't do it alone." Wyatt didn't mention he technically wasn't alone. He only nodded and left, because Vesper had already turned toward the truck as if the conversation had been a delay he'd tolerated out of loyalty, not interest. And back at the cabin, the sun sat high and hard, bright enough to make even mud look honest. Wyatt hiked up the short slope behind the property line to the spot that looked like nothing. That was the point. Nothingness had been manufactured here. A scatter of stones, a low hump of earth, moss thick as old carpet, soft in patches, brittle in others. Vesper did not charge ahead. He worked in measured arcs, head low, nostrils flaring in steady pulls, reading the air like a map no human could see. His dark amber eyes flicked once to Wyatt, then back to the ground, and Wyatt felt the old familiarity of that look. Trust, but also expectation. The dog stopped at the same place as yesterday, a precise point that would have been indistinguishable from any other to a casual eye. Vesper's posture changed, not aggressive but absolute. He planted his paws, shoulders squared, facing the same direction as Wyatt, as if the two of them were one silhouette cut from different materials. Wyatt knelt and brushed the moss with his bare hand. The surface was cool, damp from shade, but beneath it the stone felt too smooth, too uniform. He pressed his ear close. No dramatic sound, no cinematic rumble. Just a faint, consistent difference in temperature against his skin, as if something below had its own rules. He used the pry bar carefully, not jamming, not striking, testing. The first attempt gave him nothing but a flex of metal and a dull thud. The second attempt produced a barely audible click so small he could have mistaken it for the bar settling. Vesper's ears snapped tighter, and Wyatt felt his own focus narrow. He moved the bar to a different angle, then stopped. The stone was not lifting. It wasn't meant to. That was the trick. The mechanism was lateral, not vertical. A false rock face that slid like a drawer hidden under moss and time. He found the seam by touch, thin as a fingernail, then pulled away the moss in a slow line until the edge revealed itself. Even then, it didn't look like a door. It looked like geology. Whoever built this had understood what men ignored. Nobody questions a rock that looks bored to exist. About a third of the way into his work, Vesper broke pattern. He left the moss patch and trotted 10 yards to the right, down toward the tree line where an old stump stood half-rotted, its center hollow like a mouth. The dog lowered his head and inhaled at the stump's base, then backed off a step and stared at Wyatt with a stillness that felt like a command without sound. Wyatt followed, annoyed at himself for feeling obedient to a dog, and relieved at the same time that the dog was giving him something concrete. Up close, the stump wasn't just rot. Someone had arranged it. The hollow was too clean. The edges were too even. Inside, beneath a layer of damp leaves, a short length of pipe sat angled downward. Not new PVC, older metal, dark and stained, disguised to look like a forgotten bit of logging junk. Wyatt reached in and felt it, cold, dry, with a faint residue that smelled like old grease and something sharper. Ozone, like air around tired electronics. His pulse stayed steady, but his mind clicked into a new gear, a vent, not for water, for air. He scraped away debris until his fingers found a loop of metal recessed just out of sight. It was deep enough that a casual hand would never catch it. It was placed for someone who knew it existed. Wyatt wrapped the rope around his wrist for leverage, hooked the loop, and pulled. Resistance. Then a precise, mechanical give. A muted tack sound, like a latch releasing somewhere beneath stone. Vesper didn't bark. He didn't jump. He only leaned forward, ears erect, eyes locked on the ridge as if he could see through earth. That moment, simple, quiet, exact, hit Wyatt harder than any shouted warning could have. Because it meant two things at once. Leonard had not been superstitious. He had been prepared. And someone, somewhere, had maintained this. And the vent wasn't just old, it was breathing on purpose. Wyatt stared at the stump pipe and realized the moss patch wasn't the only disguise. There were layers, redundancies, the kind of redundancy built by people who planned for failure and intrusion. A fortress mindset, hiding under summer light. This wasn't a weird inheritance. This was an engineered secret that had stayed alive. Wyatt returned to the moss seam with a different caution. He slid the pry bar into the edge and pulled, not up, but sideways, matching what the latch had allowed. The stone moved. Not much, but enough to betray the lie. It scraped against hidden runners with a faint grit of sand. Underneath was not dirt, not root, not animal burrow. Underneath was a narrow gap of darkness that swallowed daylight like it had been waiting. Cold air spilled out, not the wet cold of a cellar, but a clean, filtered cold that carried no forest scent at all. Wyatt widened the opening by inches, then paused, because he'd learned in other places that the first opening was rarely the only danger. Vesper stepped forward and stopped at the threshold, body aligned with Wyatt's, head angled slightly downward. The dog's tan, tactical vest caught the sunlight for a second, then the light died on its edges as if the darkness drank it. Wyatt used his phone's flashlight, the beam thin and pale in the midday brightness, and aimed it down. Metal stairs, real stairs, not rusted rebar or crude ladder, manufactured treads, bolted and straight. On the top step was mud. Fresh, not dried into old stain, and it ran in a smear that suggested something dragged, not walked. Beside it, a scuff mark curved along the wall as if a shoulder had scraped there under weight. Wyatt crouched closer, his boots planted firm, and felt something he hadn't expected to feel here. The familiar tightening behind the ribs that came when a situation stopped being a property problem and became a human one. Vesper's dark amber eyes tracked the stairs with a focus that was obedient, yes, but also personal, as if the dog disliked the idea of pain existing in a place that pretended to be empty. Wyatt drew a slow breath and listened. At first there was nothing but his own heartbeat and the lake wind far behind him. Then he caught it, a steady hum, low and mechanical, rising and falling with the faint rhythm of moving air, a fan, running, not decades ago, now. He shifted his weight and lowered one boot onto the first step, careful, deliberate, no hurry. The temperature dropped instantly, clean cold climbing his shin like water. Vesper remained at his side, alert and steady, mission-ready posture facing the same direction, as if the dog were the only thing in this entire bright forest that truly understood the rules of what they were about to touch. Wyatt angled the phone light deeper, but the stairs turned and disappeared into black. And then, from somewhere inside, something responded. A soft whir, a tiny servo sound, the faint, precise movement of plastic on metal. The phone beam caught a lens in the corner above the stairwell, a small dome camera embedded in a seam that looked like rock. A red LED blinked once, not a warning, not a threat, a confirmation, as if the place had opened one eye and decided to remember his face. Wyatt didn't speak. Vesper didn't growl. The forest around them stayed bright and oblivious. But in the stairwell's cold breath, Wyatt understood the simplest truth of all. Whatever was down there did not want to be found. and it had just noticed it had been. Wyatt Halden stood at the threshold where summer daylight ended and an engineered cold began. One step behind him, the forest smelled like pine resin and warmed soil. One step ahead, the air drifting up the stairwell was clean in a way nature rarely was. Too dry, too filtered, too intentional. He kept his posture upright, calm by habit, not by comfort. The complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform sat on his disciplined athletic frame like a decision already made. Matching blouse and trousers fully buttoned, plain black belt, plain black combat boots, no helmet, no hat, no sunglasses, no eyewear, no vest, no armor, no gloves, no headset, no backpack, no weapon, no patches, nothing to hide behind, and nothing to blame later. His angular, rugged face stayed unreadable, sharp jawline clean-shaven, cold blue-gray eyes fixed downward as if the darkness were simply another room to clear. Beside him, Vesper held still with that quiet obedience that felt almost moral. The full-grown male Belgian Malinois, 4 to 5 years old, lean and muscular, deep fawn to mahogany with a distinct black facial mask, wore his tan tactical K9 vest and simple working dog collar like they belonged to his bones. Upright ears angled forward, intense dark amber eyes locked into the stairwell. He didn't tremble, he didn't bark. He stood alert and steady, mission ready, facing the same direction as Wyatt, as if alignment itself could be a kind of protection. Wyatt looked once over his shoulder at the bright slope, the moss-draped rock now slid aside like a secret drawer. He could still turn around. He could still tell himself this was someone else's problem. But the smear of fresh mud on the top step and the curved scuff along the wall, like a shoulder dragged under weight, had already crossed a line inside him. Property didn't bleed. People did. He set his phone flashlight to a tighter beam, lowered it to reduce glare, and took the first steps down. The temperature dropped in clean layers, as if the stairwell were passing him through a series of invisible doors. The walls weren't rough stone. They were poured concrete, dense, smooth in places, patched in others, with seams that looked like they'd been designed to resist pressure rather than hold up a basement. Halfway down, the stairs turned and the daylight vanished. The hum he'd heard above resolved into something steadier now. A ventilation fan somewhere deeper, low mechanical breath moving air through ducts that did not belong to a dead place. He kept his pace controlled, letting his eyes adjust, listening for the way sound returned. It was the wrong kind of echo. Tight, managed, swallowed by insulation and corners. Wyatt had been in tunnels overseas that felt chaotic, alive with grit and chance. This felt organized, like someone had planned for fear and then poured concrete around it. Vesper moved one step ahead, paws landing with soft precision. When the dog paused, Wyatt paused. When the dog inhaled, Wyatt listened. That was the arrangement between them, older than words. The animal reads what the human cannot, and the human carries the consequence. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a corridor that made Wyatt's chest tighten for a reason he didn't want to name. The hallway was wide enough for equipment carts, its floor coated in gritty paint meant for traction. On the wall, faded stencils had been painted over, layers of old warnings and newer touch-ups. A sign that once read restricted was now half hidden under a sloppy gray rectangle. Another placard showed a triangle symbol that meant hazard in any language, and beneath it the ghost of lettering that looked like it belonged to a different era, Cold War design, blunt and certain. The air carried a faint metallic tang, not rust, but the clean smell of old machinery that still had oil in its pores. The phone light caught a conduit line running along the ceiling, then disappearing into a junction box. The box looked newer than the wall around it. Someone had been here with tools, with time, with permission. Wyatt's mind tried to build a story that didn't require him to stay. Old government site, forgotten access, maybe a local utility. But then Vesper's ears flicked, not toward the corridor ahead, but toward a side alcove where the air smelled different. Human, stale, layered with canned food and sweat. The dog angled toward it without hurry. Wyatt followed and found the first proof that he wasn't imagining any of this. In a shallow recess, someone had made a camp that was too careful to be random. A folded tarp lay against the wall like a makeshift bed, A cluster of food cans sat stacked, labels torn away. A small battery pack and 2 spare phone chargers were arranged beside a coil of paracord. There were hand wipes, a half-used roll of electrical tape, and a dented metal cup that still held a faint ring of dried coffee. Not an abandoned stash, not old. The battery pack's indicator light, when Wyatt tapped it, blinked weakly, alive enough to be recent. He crouched, running 2 fingers across the floor. Dust lay thin here, disturbed in arcs, footprints, more than one set. Some heavy, some lighter, a smear where something had been dragged. Wyatt felt his stomach pull tight, not with fear but with recognition. This was what men did when they were trying to survive unseen. Reduce life to what you can carry, what you can hide, what you can explain in one sentence if you're caught. Vesper sniffed the cup, then the tarp, then lifted his head and looked back at Wyatt as if asking a question without sound. Wyatt didn't answer with words. He only breathed slowly and kept moving, because the deeper he went, the more the quiet felt like a trap that had learned patience. The corridor bent left. The hum of ventilation grew louder, then softer again, as if air was being rerouted. And Wyatt's phone beam swept across a heavy blast door set into the wall, thick metal with a wheel latch like something meant to hold back pressure. The wheel had fresh scrape marks near the rim, as if it had been turned recently. Another set of prints turned off into a maintenance passage narrower than the main corridor, and Vesper took it, body low but not panicked. A faint sound came then, barely there, but human. A cough caught and swallowed, the kind a person makes when they're trying not to exist. Wyatt stopped instantly. Vesper froze too, ears high, eyes intense, but the dog did not posture to attack. He held still in a way that said, "There's someone ahead, and they're afraid." Wyatt stepped forward with his hands visible, phone light angled down to avoid blinding whoever was hiding. "Hey," he said, voice low, steady, meant to travel without provoking. "I'm not here to hurt you." Silence answered, heavy and strained. Then, from behind a partially open electrical panel, a face appeared, pale in the phone beam, eyes wide from hunger and insomnia rather than madness. The man was young, late 20s, but exhaustion had put years on him. He had a lean frame that looked like it had once been built for long shifts and hard work, now sharpened by missed meals. His hair was brown and cut too short on the sides, as if he'd done it himself with impatient hands. The top was messy, stuck up in places where sweat had dried. Patchy stubble darkened his jawline, and there was a narrow cut along one cheekbone, scabbed and clean enough to be recent. His hands, raw knuckles, cracked skin, grease under the nails, held a small screwdriver like it was the only thing between him and being erased. "Don't," he rasped. His voice was hoarse, careful, trained to keep volume down. "Don't come closer." Wyatt stayed where he was, body angled slightly to show he wasn't charging. A Vesper did something that shifted the air. He sat down, squarely, directly in the man's line of sight, ears upright, eyes steady, no growl, no teeth. It wasn't submission, it was a deliberate choice to be calm. The man's grip on the screwdriver trembled, then eased by a fraction, like his nervous system recognized something honest in the dog that it couldn't find in humans. Wyatt took that inch and turned it into safety. "What's your name?" he asked. The man swallowed, his throat bobbed. "Darren," he said finally, and it sounded like a confession. "Darren Holtz." Wyatt nodded once. "Wyatt." Darren's eyes flicked to Wyatt's uniform, then to Vesper's vest, and something complicated moved across his face. Fear, relief, and the bitter knowledge that uniforms could mean rescue or cleanup depending on who owned the building. This isn't abandoned," Darren said, words coming faster now that they'd started. "They say it is. They tell the town it's nothing, but it's active. It's been active for a while." Wyatt didn't ask who they were yet. He let Darren talk, because the way a man tells a story when he thinks he might not live long enough to finish it matters. Darren took a breath, and then another, steadying himself. "I'm maintenance," he said. Not the big picture. I fix pumps, I check filters, I do what I'm told." His eyes darted toward the corridor behind Wyatt, as if expecting footsteps to appear out of the hum. A company came in, contractors at first, then permanent. Everything got relabeled, everything got painted over. They call it storage, they call it infrastructure, but it's not clean. The last words came out like a man admitting he'd been wrong for too long. Wyatt felt anger rise, controlled and quiet, the kind that didn't need volume to be dangerous. Darren swallowed again. I found logs, he said. Actual operating logs, not the ones they file. Real runtimes, valve cycles, discharge schedules. He reached into the inside pocket of his work jacket with trembling care, moving slow so Wyatt wouldn't mistake the motion. The jacket itself was dark, stained with old oil at the cuffs, practical and worn. He pulled out a sealed plastic sleeve, water-spotted but intact. Inside was a folded printout with columns of timestamps and codes, and a diagram that looked like a piping schematic, lines branching like veins toward labels that made Wyatt's stomach drop. Intake, bypass, outflow. Darren tapped one corner with a dirty fingernail. That line, he whispered, ties into the lake system, not directly, through groundwater and a feeder channel, but it's the same watershed. The town drinks from it, even if they don't think they do. Vesper leaned forward slightly, sniffed the plastic sleeve, then looked up at Wyatt with that same steady gaze he'd had on the stairs. Wyatt felt the weight of it. This wasn't just a secret under his land. It was a threat under a town full of people who were hanging festival flags and grilling burgers and trusting their water without thinking. Darren's eyes glistened with a shame that didn't ask forgiveness, only survival. I tried to say something, he said. I asked my supervisor why the cycles didn't match the filings. He smiled like I was a kid asking why the sky is blue. 2 days later, my tires were cut. Next day, there was a note on my door. Darren's mouth tightened, remembering. It said, "Stop looking." That's when I ran. I found this access because I'd serviced the vents. I figured I could hide here until I could get the proof out. Wyatt's jaw clenched. He thought of Leonard Baines again, the old surveyor's note, the way the warning had been written like someone trying to keep a younger man from making a tidy mistake. Darren looked past Wyatt, toward the corridor, and his fear sharpened into something else, urgency. You opened the hatch, he whispered. That camera saw you, the system flags movement. It's not smart like in movies, but it's enough. Someone will check. Wyatt absorbed it without flinching. He'd walked into plenty of bad rooms. What changed a bad room into a deadly one was always the same thing. Someone else had the schedule. Vesper stood up then, smooth and silent. He moved ahead, stopping at a side door recessed into the wall, smaller than the blast doors but still heavy, still sealed, still wrong for a place that was supposed to be dead. The dog froze, body rigid, ears forward, tail low and steady, not toward Wyatt, not toward Darren, but toward the door itself. Wyatt took one step closer and felt the hair on his arms lift. It wasn't a sound he heard. It was a pressure change, like air held behind metal. Vesper's stillness became a kind of prayer. Wyatt's mind flashed to a different corridor, a different war, a dog sitting in dust refusing to move until Wyatt stopped pushing forward. Do you trust what you can't see? Wyatt stopped. He held his breath. And from the other side of the door came a faint, involuntary noise, someone shifting weight, a soft scrape of fabric, the almost silent exhale of a person trying not to exist. Darren's face went gray. They're here, he mouthed. Wyatt didn't reach for a weapon because he didn't have one. He didn't have the comfort of force. He had only choices. He motioned Darren back into the shadow of the panel, then angled his phone light down, killing the beam against the floor to avoid silhouetting himself. Vesper did not move. He stood as a living barrier, steady, focused, obedient, mission-ready. Then the corridor's hum changed. A new tone layered in, an alert, subtle but unmistakable, like a system clearing its throat. The overhead fixtures that had been dead a moment ago flickered, then snapped on in a cold, industrial white that made the concrete look sterile and unforgiving. A strip light along the ceiling pulsed once, then held steady in amber, and somewhere deeper in the facility, a relay clicked. Another. Then, as if the building had decided to speak for the first time in decades, a voice came over an internal speaker, calm, professionally courteous, and cold enough to make Wyatt's spine tighten. Attention, it said, each syllable measured. This area is under control. Remain where you are. The lights shifted again, amber bleeding toward red at the edges. Vesper's ears stayed forward. Darren's breath shook in the dark behind the panel. Wyatt stared down the corridor, his face unreadable, his pulse controlled, and understood the simplest new reality. The place beneath the summer forest was not just active, it was awake. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once, sliding through the corridor the way cold air slid through vents, clean, controlled, and impossible to argue with. Remain where you are. The words weren't shouted, they were delivered with the even cadence of someone who believed panic was inefficient. Wyatt Halden didn't move. He had learned long ago that the first seconds after a command were where most people surrendered their advantage without realizing it. He stood upright in his complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform, blouse and trousers fitted, fully buttoned, plain black belt, plain black combat boots, no helmet, no hat, no eyewear, no tactical vest, no armor, no gloves, no headset, no backpack, no weapon, no extra accessories, nothing to reach for, nothing to hide behind. His angular, rugged face remained unreadable, sharp jawline clean-shaven, cold blue-gray eyes fixed on the corridor ahead as if he were watching a tide line for movement. Beside him, Vesper held steady. The full-grown male Belgian Malinois, 4 to 5 years old, lean and muscular, deep fawn to mahogany coat with a distinct black facial mask, upright ears and intense dark amber eyes, wore a tan tactical K9 vest and a simple working dog collar. He stood alert and focused, mission-ready posture aligned with Wyatt's stance, facing the same direction, like a living compass that refused to point away from danger. Darren Holtz stayed half-hidden behind the electrical panel, breathing in careful pieces. In the harsh overhead light, Darren looked like what fear does when it's forced to keep working. 29 years old but worn older, lean frame sharpened by hunger, brown hair hacked short at the sides, messy on top, patchy stubble on a tense jaw, knuckles cracked and raw. He clutched a screwdriver as if it could turn back time. "They tripped the corridor," Darren whispered, voice thin. That camera, like it's tied into a motion loop." Wyatt angled his phone light down and off, letting the facility's cold illumination do the work. He didn't like being lit. Light made silhouettes, and silhouettes made targets. Somewhere deeper, a relay clicked again, followed by another and another, like a building clearing its throat before speaking at full volume. A strip of amber LEDs along the ceiling pulsed once. Then a second strip farther down mirrored it, as if a path were being drawn in warning. The voice returned, closer now, but still through a speaker. "Mr. Halden," it said. It used his name the way a banker might use a client number. Pleasant, certain, already filed. Wyatt felt the smallest shift in his stomach. Names in places like this meant someone had watched him before he arrived. "This is private infrastructure. You are trespassing. For your safety, remain where you are while we verify the situation." Darren's eyes widened. "How?" he mouthed. Wyatt didn't answer. He let his gaze flick to Vesper. The dog's ears were forward but not flared with panic. His posture was a sealed lid, not a spring. That told Wyatt something. The threat wasn't right on top of them yet. It was organized, not immediate. The speaker crackled softly. Then the voice softened, almost sympathetic. "I'm Graham Sutter," it said. "Compliance and Risk Management." The title was as sterile as bleach. "I understand you may be confused. I'm here to resolve that." Darren made a sound that was almost a laugh, but broke into breath instead. "He's the fixer," he whispered. "He talks like he's helping." Wyatt's jaw tightened slightly. A man who introduced himself like that didn't come to negotiate truth. He came to negotiate silence. Graham continued, voice calm, as if he were reading a script designed to lower heart rates. "Mr. Halden, you have an opportunity to exit this facility safely. You inherited land. That does not grant access to restricted assets. And I can have you escorted out, and we can ensure there are no legal complications for you. In exchange, you will sign a short non-disclosure agreement, standard." The word standard landed like a threat disguised as paperwork. Wyatt kept his voice low. "And him?" He nodded toward Darren without turning his head. Darren flinched, as if being named was dangerous. Graham paused just long enough to feel intentional. "Mr. Holtz is an employee matter," he said. "He will be returned to proper supervision." It was the kind of sentence that contained no violence, but promised it anyway. Vesper shifted one paw forward, a tiny adjustment, then held. Wyatt heard Darren's breath catch. Wyatt didn't like being offered safety for a signature. He'd seen that deal before, dressed in different uniforms, spoken in different languages. It always ended the same. The person who signed lived with the knowledge, and the person who refused became a problem to be solved. Darren leaned close, whispering fast. "He's stalling," Darren said. "He'll keep you talking until the system locks. Then it's safety protocol, and they don't have to touch you. The building will do it." That was new information, and it changed the shape of the room. "What system?" Wyatt asked. Darren swallowed. "Purge cycle," he said, as if saying it too loud could trigger it. "It's a safety sequence for the sensitive bays, chemical handling, filtration, whatever they're running. If an unauthorized hatch is opened, the facility goes into containment. Doors close in layers, airflow reroutes, certain zones seal." Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "How long?" Darren's lips pressed thin. "Depends where you are when it starts. It's designed so people can't wander into the wrong bay." He hesitated, shame flickering. "Also designed so witnesses don't wander out." Wyatt absorbed it. No weapon, no radio, no easy map. Just concrete, time, and a man on the other end of a speaker willing to let procedures become a cage. He looked down the corridor and saw a wall-mounted display panel he hadn't noticed before. The amber strip seemed to lead toward it like an arrow. He moved 2 steps, slow and deliberate, not fleeing, claiming space. Vesper moved with him, aligned. Darren stayed behind, too afraid to move quickly. The display flickered as if it hadn't been used in months, then lit in a cold, pixelated blue. Across it, in block lettering, a message appeared. "Purge cycle 005812. The countdown began, numbers dropping with indifferent precision. Wyatt felt something in his chest tighten, not fear but anger, the quiet kind that made him careful. "Mr. Halden," Graham said again, as if he could see the panel through Wyatt's eyes. "I would advise you not to interact with facility systems. These protocols are for your protection." Darren let out a sound that was pure disbelief. "Protection," he whispered. Wyatt didn't respond to the speaker. He turned to Darren, voice steady. "Why are you here?" Darren's eyes flashed with pain. "Because I asked a question," he said. "That's all. The discharge schedules didn't match the filings. The pump cycles were off. The lake..." He stopped, swallowing hard. "People fish that lake. Kids swim there. They told me it was infrastructure maintenance. They told me the smells were seasonal. Then I found the real logs. I confronted my supervisor. He smiled. 2 days later, my tires were cut. Then a note." His face tightened, remembering the moment his house stopped feeling like a house. "So I ran. I grabbed what I could, and I hid." He looked at Wyatt like he was asking for permission to be a person again. "I didn't want to be a hero. I just didn't want to be complicit." Vesper's gaze flicked to Darren, then back to Wyatt, as if the dog understood shame as a scent humans tried to wash off. Wyatt's mind ran options fast. Leave now and hope Darren survives. Stay and fight without tools. Find another path before the building seals. And the corridor behind them felt suddenly shorter, as if concrete were leaning in. Graham's voice continued, smooth as oil. "Mr. Halden, I'm going to make this very simple. If you sign the NDA, there will be no trespass charge, no civil action, no inconvenience. We will escort you out. You will continue your life. This is the most reasonable outcome for everyone." Wyatt felt the trap tightening. Reasonable was what people called surrender when they wanted you to feel smart doing it. He glanced at Vesper. The Malinois stood like a statue cut from muscle, ears upright, eyes intense, posture steady. Then the dog did something subtle but important. He turned his head, not toward the corridor ahead, not toward the speaker, but toward a section of wall beside the display, where a maintenance panel sat flush in the concrete. Vesper stepped to it and inhaled once, deep. Then he pressed his nose to the seam, not pawing, not scratching, just reading. Wyatt followed the dog's line and saw nothing special. But he trusted what the dog was built to notice: air movement, metal, human residue. He knelt and placed his fingers along the panel edge. The seam was cooler here. The air around it smelled faintly different, cleaner, less stale. A draft, barely there, but real. He leaned closer. The sound of the ventilation fan changed in tone for half a second, as if airflow had been diverted behind this wall. Darren noticed too, eyes widening. "That's not on the map," Darren whispered. "They welded most of the old service chases shut." Wyatt studied the panel, then the screws. They weren't old. The heads were clean, recently turned. Someone had accessed this. The countdown on the display ticked down, 00:52:34. He had less than an hour before the building decided his future. Graham's voice softened, like a man offering mercy. "Mr. Halden, I understand you may feel obligated to assist Mr. Holtz. You are not obligated. He is an employee who violated internal policy. You are a landowner who made a mistake. Let us separate those issues." Darren flinched at the word violated. Vesper held his nose to the seam, ears forward, then looked up at Wyatt with that same unwavering focus he'd shown above ground. It was almost unsettling how quiet his certainty was. Wyatt stood slowly. "Graham," he said, speaking to the speaker as if he were in the room. "If you're so reasonable, why hide?" There was a pause, so brief it could have been a glitch, but Wyatt felt the human behind it. Then Graham replied, still polite. "I'm not hiding. I'm managing risk, and right now, you are the risk." That sentence stripped the conversation down to its bones. No morality, no community, just risk. Wyatt's eyes hardened. "Darren," he said, "how do the doors close?" Darren's throat bobbed. "In zones," he whispered. "Outer corridors first, then inner bays. They want you funneled." Wyatt nodded once. That meant the obvious path out would become a chute. He looked to Vesper again. The Malinois shifted his stance slightly, placing his body between Wyatt and the corridor, as if he could feel where the funnel would form. Wyatt realized the dog wasn't just pointing, he was positioning. "We're not signing," Wyatt said, voice level. Darren's breath caught. Graham's voice remained calm, but a sharper edge threaded through it. "Mr. Halden, you're making a temporary situation permanent." The timer read 00:49:02. Wyatt crouched by the panel again and slid his fingers under the edge. It didn't budge. Not without a tool. He looked at Darren. "That screwdriver," he said. Darren hesitated, then handed it over like a man handing someone the last piece of himself. Wyatt set the tip into the seam and applied pressure carefully, listening for the sound of metal protesting. Vesper stood close, shoulder aligned with Wyatt's thigh, steadying him the way he'd done on other nights in other places. The panel shifted a millimeter, then another. A breath of colder, cleaner air slipped out, brushing Wyatt's knuckles like a promise. He widened the gap slightly and aimed his phone light inside. The beam caught a narrow service chase running behind the wall, angled downward and then away. It was tight, maybe shoulder width, not comfortable, not safe, but it was a route the building hadn't advertised. Darren stared at it, disbelief and hope colliding in his face. "If that goes to the old vent corridor," he whispered. Wyatt didn't let the thought finish. He didn't want a plan that depended on luck. He wanted a plan that depended on movement. The countdown kept ticking. Graham's voice came again, softer now, almost disappointed. "Mr. Halden, if you proceed into unauthorized service passages, I cannot guarantee your safety." Wyatt's mouth tightened. "You never could," he replied. He pulled the panel wider. The opening was narrow enough that it would force single-file movement. It would force them to choose what mattered. He looked at Darren, then at Vesper. The dog's dark amber eyes held his with absolute clarity. "Go now." Darren swallowed hard. "I can't," he started. Wyatt cut him off quietly. "You can," he said. "One step at a time." Darren's shoulders shook once, then steadied. He was terrified, but terror wasn't the same as surrender. The timer read 00:45:21. Wyatt angled the panel and tested the edges, sharp metal. He took off nothing. He had no gloves to protect him, so he moved with care, because blood in a place like this wasn't just pain, it was evidence. Vesper lowered his head, sniffed the opening, then stepped back half a pace, as if measuring whether his vest would snag. He turned his body sideways, precise. That small calculation in the dog's movement was the chapter's final truth. This escape would cost them something. Maybe skin, maybe time, maybe proof. but it would give them a chance to stay alive long enough to make the truth matter. Wyatt met Darren's eyes. "When we move," he said, "we move quiet. No running, no panic. We don't give the building a story to write about us." Darren nodded, lips pressed tight. The corridor lights pulsed amber again. Somewhere deeper, another door latch clicked, preparing to close. Graham's voice returned one last time, smooth as a closing argument. "Final opportunity, Mr. Halden. Sign and walk out." Wyatt didn't answer. He slid his phone into a pocket, kept the light angled low, and placed one hand on the panel's edge. Vesper stood at his side, alert and steady, facing the same direction. Wyatt took a slow breath, feeling the clean cold from the service chase brush his skin like a warning and an invitation. Then he made the choice the building hadn't planned for. He shifted his body toward the narrow opening, toward the cleaner air, toward the unknown path, and felt, for the first time since he'd returned to this bright town, that the fight had truly begun. Wyatt Halden surfaced back into summer as if breaking through ice. The air above ground hit him warm and scented. Pine, lake water, smoke from someone's grill. So ordinary it felt like a lie. He emerged from the woods with his uniform still immaculate in shape, if not in spirit. Complete standard-issue green digital camouflage blouse and trousers fully buttoned, plain black belt, plain black combat boots, no gear, no weapon, no extra accessories to explain. His angular, rugged face stayed calm by force of habit, sharp jawline clean-shaven, cold blue-gray eyes scanning the line where trees met town. Beside him, Vesper moved in the same direction, a full-grown male Belgian Malinois K9, 4 to 5 years old. Lean muscular build, deep fawn to mahogany coat with a distinct black facial mask, upright ears, and intense dark amber eyes. The dog's tan tactical K9 vest sat snug and functional, a simple working dog collar tight against his throat. He didn't act like a dog enjoying freedom. He acted like a dog holding the world in his nose, reading its intentions. Darren Holtz came last, breathing hard, shoulders drawn tight as if the sky itself could be weaponized. At 29, Darren looked like a man who had stopped sleeping in full nights and started sleeping in calculations. Brown hair cut too short on the sides, messy on top, patchy stubble, cracked hands still smelling faintly of oil and metal, even after the damp underground air. They had left the facility without being trapped, but Wyatt didn't mistake escape for safety. The countdown had been real, the voice on the speaker had been real, and most of all, the fact that Graham Sutter knew Wyatt's name meant the hunt had started before Wyatt even understood there were hunters. The town below them was wearing a mask of celebration, flags hung from lampposts. A stage was being assembled near the marina. Children ran in bright shirts, sticky with shaved ice, and men in ball caps carried coolers as if the biggest danger today would be sunburn. Wyatt felt the familiar internal split, one part of him noticing every angle and blind spot, another part aching at the thought of how easily normal life could be crushed by people who treated communities like accounting columns. Darren whispered, "We can't go to your truck." Wyatt nodded without looking at him. He already knew. A direct route was a funnel, and funnels were what systems like Graham's were built to create. "We disappear in plain sight," Wyatt said, voice low. Darren flinched at the word disappear, but followed. Vesper stayed close, head level, ears pivoting. If the facility had woken, it would use the town's infrastructure the way it used vents and cameras. Quietly, efficiently, without drama. They moved downhill onto a side street and blended into the flow of people heading toward the lakefront. Wyatt walked like he belonged there, not like he was running. The hardest part of hiding wasn't motion, it was keeping your body from broadcasting fear. Darren's shoulders were rigid, his gaze darting. Wyatt touched Darren's elbow once, not kindly, just steadying. "Look bored," he murmured. "Bored keeps you alive." Darren swallowed and forced his eyes forward. The marina was busy. Boats bobbed at their slips. A band tested microphones, the feedback squealing once before a technician waved it down. Wyatt saw cameras mounted on poles. Public safety, traffic, tourism. He also saw what didn't belong. A white utility van parked too perfectly at the edge of the lot. Doors closed, no logo visible. Engine off, but with the subtle heat shimmer of something recently running. 2 men stood near it, dressed like contractors. Neutral jackets, khaki work pants, caps pulled low. They weren't looking at boats, they were looking at people. One was tall with a thick neck and a shaved head that caught sunlight. His build was heavy, not fat, the kind of mass that comes from lifting, not eating. The other was leaner, with a narrow, angular face and a short beard trimmed close, eyes hidden behind plain glasses that weren't for style. His posture was meticulous, as if he stood according to a checklist. Wyatt didn't stare. He didn't need to. Vesper did the staring for him. The Malinois' nostrils flared once as they passed a group of festival volunteers carrying folding chairs. Then the dog's head turned subtly toward the two men. Vesper didn't tug the leash. He didn't change pace. He just moved half a step closer to Wyatt's leg and lifted his muzzle a fraction, scenting the air. Wyatt felt the dog's focus tighten like a wire. He didn't need a spoken warning. He knew what Vesper was reading. Hot rubber, machine oil, faint metallic tang carried on fabric, smells of a working environment, not lemonade stands. As they crossed the marina walkway, the lean man in glasses shifted his stance slightly, turning his shoulders a few degrees to keep them in his peripheral vision. It was a small movement, but it was the movement of someone trained to track without looking like he was tracking. Wyatt's mind catalogued it. No insignia, no overt threat, but purposeful. Darren's breathing quickened. "They found us already," he whispered. "Not found," Wyatt murmured. "They're narrowing." He guided Darren toward the densest cluster of people, an information booth where locals asked about kayak rentals and parking. A woman behind the booth handed out maps. She was in her late 30s, tall and narrow-shouldered, freckles scattered across sun-reddened cheeks, auburn hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her green eyes looked tired in the way people's eyes look when they've spent years being helpful on command. She smiled automatically at Wyatt, then her gaze flicked to Vesper and softened with honest respect. "Working dog?" she asked, voice warm. Wyatt nodded. "Just passing through." She held out a paper schedule for the festival events. Wyatt took it as if he cared. The paper was more than a prop. It was an excuse to stop without stopping, to look around without looking hunted. Vesper stood steady, facing the same direction as Wyatt, ears forward. The woman's name tag read, Emily Pierce. She wasn't just a volunteer. Her posture had the alertness of someone used to terrain. Wyatt filed it away. Darren kept his eyes down, pretending to read the schedule too. Wyatt watched the utility van without moving his head. The shaved-head man had shifted closer, but not directly. He was using the crowd to close distance the way a fisherman uses current. Vesper's eyes tracked him calmly, and that calm was the most unnerving part. The dog wasn't afraid. He was evaluating. Wyatt leaned closer to Darren. "We split for 10 seconds, he said. Darren's eyes widened. "No," Wyatt cut him off. "Not alone, just not stacked." He handed Darren the festival schedule. "Walk toward the food trucks. Don't look back. I'll meet you at the old boathouse sign." Darren hesitated, terror and obedience fighting. Then Vesper gave a small, controlled nudge with his shoulder, not to Darren, but to Wyatt's thigh, like a reminder, "Move now." Darren exhaled shakily and peeled off into the crowd. Wyatt turned the opposite direction, toward a line of boats and a rack of life vests. Vesper stayed with Wyatt, body close, ears pivoting. The two men near the van didn't rush. That told Wyatt everything about who they worked for. Men who rushed made mistakes. Men like Graham hired men who didn't. Wyatt moved past a stack of coolers and into a narrower lane between vendor tents. He slowed at a table of handmade knives and leather goods, craft show stuff that older men admired with quiet approval. He picked up a leather belt, felt its weight, nodded like a shopper. Vesper stood beside him, steady. The vendor, a stocky man in his 50s with a gray mustache, didn't ask questions. He just watched the dog with the kind of respect that comes from having worked around animals that matter. Wyatt's attention stayed on the reflections in a nearby window. The lean man with glasses was closer now, using the same lane, his face turned toward a display but his posture angled to see Wyatt. Vesper's nostrils flared again. The dog's ears remained upright, but his tail lowered slightly, controlled, not fearful. Wyatt put the belt down, thanked the vendor, and drifted toward the boathouse sign where he'd told Darren to go. He didn't run. Running made you an object. He wanted to be a man at a festival, yet his body was already mapping exits, between the bait shop and the restroom, behind the stage, down the dock. He reached the boathouse sign, a weathered wooden marker with the town's name burned into it, and saw Darren there, pretending to study a poster for tomorrow's canoe race. Darren's face was pale, his mouth tight. "They're still watching," Darren whispered. Wyatt nodded. "That means they're not sure," he said. "Uncertainty is our window." A sharp scent drifted over the water, diesel from a boat engine. Nadine Carver appeared from the crowd as if she'd stepped out of a different story. She was 38, with dark brown hair pulled into a low, tight bun that didn't move even in wind. Her face was sharp and intelligent, skin lightly weathered from field work, eyes a cool gray-green that looked like they were always measuring something. She wore a navy field jacket over a neutral top, dark technical pants, and scuffed hiking boots. A slim tablet was tucked under her arm, and a laminated state ID hung from her pocket on a clip. She didn't look like a tourist. She looked like someone who had learned to be unimpressed by people trying to charm her out of questions. "You said you had logs," she said quietly to Darren, as if they were in a lab, not a festival. Darren nodded. His hands shook as he gestured. Nadine's gaze flicked to Wyatt, then to Vesper, then back to Darren. She took in Wyatt's uniform and the dog's vest and didn't ask for a story. People like Nadine didn't waste time on stories. "Show me," she said. Darren pulled the plastic sleeve from inside his jacket. Nadine glanced at the printout, then at the piping schematic. Her jaw tightened. "This line isn't supposed to be cycling," she murmured. She tapped her tablet and brought up a map. Watershed flow lines, contour shading. "If they're discharging into that feeder," she said, voice low, "it'll push into the lake's intake zone over time. Not instantly. Slowly. That's why people dismiss it." Her eyes hardened. "But it's real." Wyatt felt something steady in his chest. Evidence mattered. A soldier could hold a line, but truth was what held a community together when the shooting stopped. Nadine looked up. "We need a sample point," she said. "Not from the surface, from the seep, the groundwater interface." Darren's lips parted. "I can show you where," he whispered, then flinched as if he'd said too much. Nadine's gaze sharpened. "They're still running equipment," she said. "I've been seeing odd readings for weeks. Pressure anomalies, micro-subsidence. I thought it was seasonal." She stared at the logs again, and then at Wyatt. "It isn't." The festival noise swelled, a cheer as a band started playing. It should have felt cheerful. Instead, Wyatt felt the town's innocence like a fragile glass in his hands. He looked at Darren. "What else is down there?" Darren's eyes darted toward the utility van, then away. "There's a vault room," he said, voice barely audible. "That's where the real proof is. Shipping logs, sealed samples, chain of custody stuff. The kind that holds up in court." Nadine's expression turned colder. "They're not just cheating paperwork," she said. "They're hiding something they know would end them." Darren nodded once, miserable. "Well, that's why they can't let me walk." Wyatt's mind moved fast. Vault room meant the operation had a core. It also meant they had time protocols and security layers, systems built to withstand inspection. Wyatt looked down at his hands and realized, with a bitter clarity, what the real trap was. This wasn't just a secret under his land, it was a legal noose already tied. If the facility was discovered through his property access, the narrative would be simple. The new landowner broke in, caused a breach, contaminated the watershed. A perfect scapegoat with a deed in his pocket. Leonard Baines hadn't just left him land. He'd left him the kind of door that powerful people loved to blame on whoever opened it. Wyatt's eyes flicked to Vesper. The Malinois stared out across the marina, ears rigid, reading movement. Wyatt understood then that the dog hadn't led him to treasure or adventure. The dog had led him into a test of responsibility. He tightened his jaw. "We don't give them a story," Wyatt said. Darren swallowed. Nadine frowned. "What does that mean?" Wyatt's voice stayed calm. "It means we document everything," he said. "Time, place, photos, samples, witness chain." Nadine nodded once, approving. "Good," she said. "Science is a language they can't bully." The lean man with glasses shifted again near the utility van. The shaved head man spoke briefly into his sleeve as if into a mic, though no mic was visible. Wyatt's gaze remained unfazed, but his muscles tightened in a controlled way. He wasn't hunted by a monster. He was hunted by logistics. Nadine slid her tablet into a protective sleeve. "We need to move before they close their net," she said. Darren's shoulders shook. "They already did," he whispered. Wyatt didn't let that land. He looked to Vesper. The dog's dark amber eyes met his, steady. And then Vesper did something that made Wyatt's breath stall. He turned his head toward the boardwalk, not at the men by the van, but at a man in a municipal polo shirt carrying a clipboard, an actual festival worker, whose sleeves smelled faintly of hot rubber and machine oil, too. The worker's smile was polite, his posture casual, but his eyes were scanning. Vesper's ears pinned forward, and the dog stepped subtly, placing his body between Wyatt and that man without a sound. The message was clear. The hunt wasn't just two men by a van. It was spread through the crowd, disguised as normal. Nadine's gaze followed Vesper's line and sharpened. "They're using locals," she murmured. Darren's face went hollow. Wyatt's voice stayed even. "That's why we leave on our terms." His phone buzzed once in his pocket. No call, just a text notification with no preview because he'd disabled it. He pulled it out and saw an unknown number. One line of text, no punctuation, no anger. "You can leave town today or you can leave in an ambulance tomorrow." Wyatt stared at it for a second, then slipped the phone back without showing Darren or Nadine. Threats like that were meant to be shared. Shared threats spread fear. Wyatt wasn't going to feed fear. He lifted his eyes to the lake, to the flags, to the children laughing, and felt the anger settle into something steadier. Vesper stood at his side, alert and steady, facing the same direction. Nadine tightened her grip on her tablet. Darren swallowed hard. The band on stage hit a bright chord and the crowd cheered. Under the cheer, Wyatt heard the quieter truth. The hunt had shifted from warning to retrieval. Wyatt Halden did not go back to the cabin. Not yet. The cabin was a location, and locations became patterns, and patterns became easy to predict once a man like Graham Sutter decided you were a risk worth managing. Wyatt stayed in the brightest part of town instead, letting sunlight and people do what darkness and empty roads could not: complicate surveillance. He walked with the same calm, composed authority he'd carried into worse places. His complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform fully buttoned and properly fitted. Plain black belt, plain black combat boots, no helmet, no hat, no eyewear, no tactical vest, no body armor, no gloves, no headset, no backpack, no weapon, no patches or extra accessories. His angular, rugged face remained disciplined and unreadable, clean-shaven, sharp jawline, cold blue-gray eyes that scanned without twitching. Vesper stayed aligned at his side like a shadow that could think. A full-grown male Belgian Malinois canine, 4 to 5 years old, lean muscular build, deep fawn to mahogany coat with a distinct black facial mask, upright ears, intense dark amber eyes, wearing a tan tactical canine vest and a simple working dog collar. He moved alert and steady, focused and obedient, mission-ready, facing the same direction as Wyatt as if loyalty was a compass needle. Darren Holtz walked a step behind, shoulders tight, hands raw and cracked, the scent of oil and panic clinging to his worn work jacket. Dr. Nadine Carver kept pace on the other side, 38, and built for field work rather than comfort. Dark brown hair pulled into a tight low bun, sharp intelligent features, gray-green eyes that measured angles and probabilities instead of hoping for mercy. She carried a slim tablet and a sealed sample kit tucked close under her navy field jacket, her boots scuffed from real ground. "You said sheriff," she murmured as they turned onto a side street away from the marina noise. "Not the state police?" Wyatt didn't slow. "The state police take time," he said. "And right now, time is Graham's weapon." Darren swallowed. "He's got the cameras," he whispered. "He's got people." Wyatt's mouth tightened. "Then we use one person who still has to look the town in the face tomorrow." Sheriff Hank Delaney's office sat 2 blocks off the main strip, brick and plain, an American flag hanging limp in the warmth. A cruiser idled out front, engine low. The building smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Inside, the air conditioner hummed like a tired animal, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look a little more honest than they wanted to be. A deputy at the front desk, young, sandy-haired, with a neat uniform and the kind of polite nervousness that said he still believed rules could solve most problems, looked up and froze for half a second at the sight of Wyatt's uniform and Vesper's vest. His gaze flicked to Darren's worn face, then to Nadine's state ID clip, then back to Wyatt. "Sheriff's in," the deputy said, voice careful, as if he could already hear how this would sound in a small town. "But—" Wyatt didn't push. He waited. Waiting was its own form of control. Vesper stood square and calm, not intimidating, just present, his dark amber eyes steady. The deputy swallowed and nodded toward a door at the back. Go on. Sheriff Delaney's office was not large, but it carried the weight of a man who'd spent decades telling people bad news without flinching. Hank Delaney was 56, square-faced and weathered, skin lined at the corners of his eyes like cold had carved him, salt and pepper hair cut short, a neatly trimmed mustache that made his mouth look sterner than it probably was. He wore his sheriff uniform like a promise, tidy shirt, duty belt, black boots, radio mic clipped close. His shoulders were thick, his posture steady, but fatigue sat on him in a way Wyatt recognized, the fatigue of someone who had tried to hold a community together through winters and budget meetings and domestic calls that never made headlines. Delaney's eyes flicked over Wyatt, then Vesper, then Darren and Nadine. He didn't ask them to sit. He also didn't tell them to leave. That was Delaney's first confession. He already knew something was wrong, and he was deciding what kind of wrong he could afford. Halden, Delaney said, not surprised. Baines's land. Wyatt nodded once. Sheriff? Delaney's gaze settled on Darren. You're the one who's been making noise. Darren flinched. I tried to do it quiet, he said, voice hoarse. They didn't let me. Nadine stepped forward and placed her sample kit on Delaney's desk with the careful respect of someone presenting evidence, not drama. Sheriff, I'm Dr. Nadine Carver, she said, and her tone was calm but firm. State hydrology. I've been tracking anomalies in the watershed. I have preliminary samples and flow modeling. Delaney's eyes narrowed, not at her credentials, but at what they implied. This is about the lake, he said. People swim in that lake. That's exactly why we're here, Nadine replied. Darren set the plastic sleeve with the operating log and piping schematic beside Nadine's kit. His hands trembled, but he forced them to stay on the desk, visible. These are not the filings, Darren said. These are the real run cycles. Delaney stared at the papers for a long beat, then looked up. You realize what you're asking me to do, he said quietly. You're asking me to light a match in a room full of dry hay. Wyatt kept his voice even. I'm asking you to look at what's already burning, he said. Delaney's jaw tightened. He leaned back slowly, and the chair creaked like an old argument. That company, he started, then stopped, as if saying the name would summon consequences. And they fund the volunteer fire department. They sponsor the summer festival. They keep half this county employed one way or another. His eyes hardened. If I go public with this and I'm wrong, I don't just lose my badge, I lose people's livelihoods. Nadine didn't flinch. If you do nothing and we're right, she said, you lose their health. Quietly. Over years. The kind of loss nobody can sue for until it's too late. Delaney's gaze flicked to Darren again. And you, he said, you worked in that place. Darren swallowed, shame flushing his pale cheeks. I did, he admitted. I fixed what they told me to fix. I didn't know the full picture until I saw the logs. He hesitated, then the words came out raw. I asked why the discharge schedule didn't match the reports. After that, everything changed. They wanted me scared. They wanted me alone. They wanted me gone. Delaney's expression tightened, something like regret crossing his face before he buried it. Wyatt watched the sheriff's hands. They were steady, but the knuckles were white. A man like Delaney carried pressure the way old beams carried weight, quietly until one day they cracked. You're telling me there's a facility under Baines land, Delaney said. An active one, Wyatt answered without embellishment. It exists, he said. It's engineered, it's monitored, and someone named Graham Sutter is already trying to control how this story ends. Delaney's eyes flashed at the name. That was the second confession. Delaney had heard it before, even if he wished he hadn't. Sutter, he said under his breath. Risk management. He looked down at the papers again, then at Nadine's kit. If this breaks, he said, it breaks in two directions. People will ask why I didn't stop it, and people will ask why I let it stop their paychecks. Wyatt's voice stayed calm. That's the two kinds of collapse, he said. Public collapse and quiet collapse. Delaney stared at him as if weighing which kind of disaster he could live with. Nadine opened her tablet and turned it so Delaney could see. Watershed lines, a mottled seep, a highlighted zone where the groundwater fed into the lake's intake region. She didn't over-explain. She let the lines speak. This is why the town doesn't see it, she said. It doesn't kill in a day, it changes the baseline. Delaney's eyes tracked the map, and something in his face shifted, less denial, more dread. Wyatt felt Vesper's posture change slightly. The Malinois stepped forward, not toward Delaney's desk, but toward Delaney himself, moving with that controlled steadiness that made grown men stop talking. Vesper did not bark, he did not challenge. He simply approached and stopped within reach, dark amber eyes lifted to Delaney's face. Delaney froze. His tough sheriff mask faltered for half a second, replaced by something older and softer. His hand lowered instinctively, and Vesper leaned lightly into his leg, just a pressure, grounding, not begging. Delaney swallowed hard. "I had a dog once," he said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "K9 on search calls, winter rescue, lost him on the ice my second year as sheriff." His eyes went distant for a beat, then returned sharper. "Dogs don't do politics," he added almost to himself. "They don't do lies." The room went still. Darren's breath hitched. Nadine didn't move. Wyatt held Delaney's gaze and let that memory finish its work. Then Wyatt reached into Nadine's sample kit pocket and pulled out a small satellite messenger. Bright, compact, clearly field gear, not something Wyatt wore or carried as an accessory. Nadine's eyes flicked to him, approving without smiling. Wyatt keyed in a short packet, coordinates of the hatch, a photo of the operating log, a photo of Nadine's sample labels, and a timestamp. He didn't write an essay. He wrote enough to create gravity. "Who are you sending that to?" Delaney asked. Wyatt didn't posture. "Agent Marisol Vega," he said. "Federal Environmental and Infrastructure. She's been chasing similar patterns." At the mention, Delaney's eyes narrowed. "Vega," he murmured, recognizing the name with the wary respect small-town law gives to people who can arrive with warrants and teams. Wyatt described her as he had heard her described. Late 30s, voice calm and precise, the kind of agent who asked for data before emotion, who moved like she didn't waste steps, who didn't get impressed by uniforms or intimidated by company money. "If she gets this packet," Wyatt said, "she has grounds to move. Not today like a movie, but soon enough to matter." The messenger chirped softly, "Sent." Delaney exhaled like a man who'd just stepped onto thin ice because the water behind him was worse. Not the tech, not the message, but the sheriff's decision forming in his silence. Delaney stood and walked to the window, staring out at the sunlit street where festival banners fluttered. "If I back this," he said slowly, "I'm not just picking a side. I'm picking a future." He turned back and his eyes were tired but clearer. "Here's what I can do," he said. "I can't roll a cruiser up to that land right now. Not openly, not with half the town watching. But I can give you a window." Darren stiffened. Nadine's grip tightened on her tablet. Wyatt stayed calm. "How long?" Wyatt asked. Delaney glanced at his watch. 50 minutes, he said. "That's how long before the company's people start asking why I let strangers into my office. That's how long before my phone starts ringing with community concerns." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folded county maintenance map. Old, marked practical. "There's a service route behind the ridge," Delaney said. "Old utility easement. It'll get you close without crossing the main approach." Darren's eyes widened. "That's the route to the vault corridor," he whispered, stunned that the sheriff knew it existed at all. Delaney's mouth tightened. "Baines didn't buy that land for scenery," he said. "He came to me once, years ago. He didn't have proof, but he had instincts. I told him to stay out of it." Regret flashed across Delaney's face. "Maybe that was the wrong advice." Nadine stepped forward. "We need chain of custody," she said. "If we touch vault evidence, we document every hand." Delaney nodded. "I'll log your report as an environmental concern," he said. "It won't say everything, but it creates a paper trail." Wyatt watched him closely. "And if Sutter moves first?" Wyatt asked. Delaney's jaw tightened. "Then we move smarter," he said. "But don't mistake this for protection. He'll come." Wyatt stood, and Vesper rose with him, posture steady, eyes forward. Darren looked like he wanted to say thank you but couldn't trust gratitude yet. Nadine's face remained composed, but her eyes held something like belief. They left the sheriff's office through the side exit, into sunlight so bright it felt insulting. The festival noise rolled over them again, cheerful and oblivious. Wyatt guided them out of town toward the tree line, choosing back roads and angles that kept them out of open view. As they reached the forest edge, the air cooled, and the scent of pine returned, but now it felt different, like a stage set that could hide anything. Vesper's pace slowed. The Malinois' ears snapped upright, then angled toward a patch of damp ground beside the path. He stopped and froze so completely it looked like someone had switched him off. Wyatt followed the dog's gaze and saw it. A fresh boot print pressed into soft earth. Sharp tread, not a hiker's pattern, too deliberate. Another print beside it, close, recent. Darren's face drained. Nadine's eyes hardened. Wyatt didn't curse. He didn't rush. He simply felt the world tighten into a narrower shape. And Graham wasn't waiting behind paperwork anymore. He was close enough to leave footprints, and this time the hunt wasn't going to stay polite. The northern summer never truly went dark. It only cooled into a bruised blue, as if the sky refused to admit the day was over. That twilight made the lake look like polished slate and the pines like silhouettes cut from paper. Wyatt Halden moved through the tree line with the same calm, composed authority he carried everywhere, his posture upright and disciplined, his angular, rugged face set hard and clean-shaven, cold blue-gray eyes scanning the ridge the way other men scanned headlines. He wore the same complete standard-issue green digital camouflage uniform, matching blouse and trousers, properly fitted and fully buttoned, plain black belt, plain black combat boots, and nothing else. No helmet, no hat, no eyewear, no tactical vest, no body armor, no gloves, no headset, no backpack, no weapon, no patches, no extra accessories that could be explained later as intent. Vesper stayed tight to his left, a full-grown male Belgian Malinois canine, 4 to 5 years old, with a lean muscular build and a deep fawn to mahogany coat that darkened in the low light, a distinct black facial mask giving his face a permanent intensity. His upright ears never stopped triangulating sound. His dark amber eyes stayed fixed forward. The tan tactical K9 vest and simple working dog collar sat snug on his frame. He looked alert and steady, focused, obedient, mission-ready, facing the same direction as Wyatt, as if alignment itself was protection. Darren Holtz followed close behind, thin and drawn, his brown hair cut too short on the sides like he'd done it in panic, patchy stubble on his jaw, hands raw and cracked from tools and stress. Dr. Nadine Carver moved on the other side, 38 and built for fieldwork, hair pulled into a tight low bun that didn't move even in wind, gray-green eyes sharp with the kind of focus that didn't rely on hope. She carried a sealed evidence pouch and a compact sample kit. Her navy field jacket and scuffed boots looked like they belonged to a person who had learned not to romanticize nature. They didn't take the main approach. Sheriff Delaney's folded county map had shown them a quiet utility easement behind the ridge, an old service cut through brush that looked like nothing unless you were trained to see patterns in the nothing. The facility's breathing hum was faint out here, mostly swallowed by trees, but Vesper kept angling his muzzle into the air as if tasting a current. Darren whispered, "It'll be armed by midnight," meaning the purge cycle, an automated containment and data clearing sequence that could close zones and wipe local logs under the label of safety. Graham Sutter had called it protection. Darren had called it a cage. Wyatt didn't call it anything, he just treated it like a deadline. They reached the disguised hatch with the care of people approaching a sleeping animal that could wake angry. Nadine took a quick photo with timestamp, then another of the surrounding ground for context. Darren worked the hidden latch with hands that shook until he forced them still. The stone slid aside with a soft scrape. Cold, filtered air lifted out, clean and wrong. They descended single file, Wyatt first, Vesper second, Darren third, Nadine last, because Nadine insisted on documenting without losing the chain. Inside, the corridor lights were dimmer than before, as if the facility was conserving power or keeping itself quiet. Amber strips pulsed along the ceiling like a heartbeat. Somewhere deeper, a fan tone shifted and then steadied again. Darren guided them through a maintenance passage that smelled of old oil and hot metal, then down into a wider concrete hall where blast doors sat like thick eyelids. Wyatt kept his phone light angled low and tight. He wasn't here to explore, only to extract. Darren pointed at a wall-mounted panel and swallowed. Vault corridor, he murmured. Nadine's breath slowed, her mind already labeling the evidence they needed. Shipping manifests, sealed samples, any video log that showed operational intent, not just accidental discharge. Vesper's pace changed as they approached, still silent, still steady, but the dog's shoulders tightened and his ears angled slightly higher, as if the air itself had become crowded. Then Vesper stopped, not in alarm, not in confusion, stopped in the way a working dog stops when a truth is directly in front of him. He lowered his head and inhaled at the seam of a reinforced door with a narrow view slit. His body held rigid and calm at once, as if aggression would be a waste and stillness was the strongest warning. Wyatt felt it too a second later, not a sound, but a pressure change like air trapped behind steel. Darren's face went pale. "That's the vault," he whispered. "But it shouldn't smell like—" He didn't finish. Nadine stepped closer and her eyes narrowed. "There's someone in there," she said, and it wasn't guesswork. Wyatt leaned near the slit and heard it, a faint, shallow inhale, the kind a person takes when they're trying not to be heard. Wyatt's decision arrived fully formed. He didn't ask whether they could afford to help. He knew what it would cost to leave a person behind. Darren fumbled a key card from his pocket, an old maintenance credential he'd kept hidden like a relic. He swiped it. The reader blinked red. Darren's throat bobbed. "They revoked it," he whispered. Nadine's hand tightened around her evidence pouch. Wyatt didn't have tools, and that was the point of the uniform. He had come here as a man, not an arsenal. He crouched, studied the hinges, then the lock housing. "Manual override," Darren said quickly, pointing to a recessed panel. "But it takes a code." Wyatt looked at Vesper. The Malinois didn't paw. He didn't scratch. He simply pressed his nose to the seam again, then shifted half a step and stared at a different spot on the wall, an innocuous plate with newer screws. Nadine caught the detail immediately. "That's been opened recently," she whispered. Darren's breath hitched. "That's where they fed the signer," he said, and shame flashed across his face at what he'd just admitted. Wyatt slipped the screwdriver Darren carried like a talisman into the screw head and turned. The plate came loose. Behind it was a short conduit access that led to a mechanical latch line. Crude, practical, and exactly the kind of workaround people used when they wanted a door to look secure while still being usable. Wyatt pulled once, hard and controlled. Inside, a bolt retracted with a dull thunk. The door cracked open. Cold air spilled out, carrying the unmistakable scent of human stress. Sweat, stale breath, fear held too long. A man stood just inside the vault's dim light, hands bound with plastic ties, suit jacket wrinkled and dirty, collar open as if he'd been grabbed mid-argument. He looked 50-something, maybe 52, with graying hair combed back in a habit of professionalism, and a face that still held sharp edges beneath fatigue. High cheekbones, a straight nose, a mouth set tight from refusing to beg. His skin was pale under fluorescent light, eyes a tired hazel that flared with shock when he saw Wyatt and then Vesper. An ID badge hung crooked from his belt. Harlan Fitch, certified environmental auditor. "Don't," Harlan rasped, then stopped as if he didn't know which direction danger lived. Wyatt kept his hands visible and his voice low. "We're getting you out," he said. Harlan's gaze flicked to Darren, recognition and betrayal colliding in one look. Darren flinched. "I didn't—" Darren started. Harlan cut him off with a single, exhausted shake of his head. "They're making me sign," he whispered. "A clean report. They said it's just paper. And they said the town needs jobs." His eyes watered, not from sentiment, but from the humiliation of being used as a stamp. Nadine stepped in, calm as ice. "Harlan, I'm Dr. Nadine Carver, State Hydrology," she said, showing her ID briefly. "If you can walk, we can preserve the truth." Harlan's breathing shook. Then Vesper, the dog who had found a door no one could see, moved forward and stopped within reach, posture steady and obedient, not threatening. Harlan stared at the Malinois' black mask and dark amber eyes, and something in him broke in a quiet way, like a man realizing he'd been waiting for any honest witness at all. Wyatt cut the zip ties with the edge of Darren's tool, freeing Harlan's wrists. That choice, rescuing a man before grabbing data, was not heroic theater. It was principle. and principle was what men over 45 recognized faster than any plot twist. You do the right thing first, even when the clock is screaming. Nadine's voice sharpened. "Vault contents," she said. "Now!" Darren moved like someone who finally had permission to fix what he'd helped break. He crossed to a metal cabinet and yanked it open. Inside were binders stamped with internal routing codes, a clipboard clipped with a shipping log, and a hard case with tamper-evident seals. Nadine's hands were quick, methodical. She slid evidence bags out, labeled times, photographed seals, captured serial numbers. Wyatt used his phone to record a continuous video, no cuts, no drama, panning from the shipping logs to the sealed case to the room's wall monitor, where a system screen still displayed run cycles and discharge windows, proof the facility was active and intentional. Darren pulled a small drive from a mounted slot and held it like it could burn him. "This is the local log mirror," he whispered. "If Purge hits, this gets wiped." Nadine bagged it, sealed it, wrote her initials without flourish. Harlan stepped back against the wall, breathing hard, eyes fixed on the evidence as if it were the only solid thing left in his life. Then the facility spoke again. Not Graham's voice this time, but the building's. An alarm tone rose low and steady, not a siren, more like a warning chime. The amber strips along the ceiling shifted toward red. Darren's face drained. "Purge is starting early," he whispered. "They triggered it." Nadine's jaw set. "We move," she said. Wyatt turned to Vesper, and the dog had already pivoted toward the corridor, ears erect, eyes focused. They left the vault in a tight line. Wyatt first, Vesper second, Harlan third, Darren fourth, Nadine last, because Nadine refused to abandon chain of custody even while running from steel. They moved through the corridor where blast doors sat recessed in the walls like guillotines waiting politely. The air changed, cooler, drier, indicating airflow rerouting. A heavy door ahead began to close with a measured groan, not slamming, but sealing, like a bank vault deciding a transaction was over. Wyatt felt time compress into a single narrow shape, the one that makes a viewer's stomach drop, because the door wasn't closing behind them. It was closing in front of them, and it didn't care who was innocent. Harlan stumbled, legs weak from confinement. Nadine's evidence bag knocked his hip. Darren swore under his breath. Wyatt didn't shout. Shouting wasted oxygen. He increased his pace by half a step, reached the narrowing gap, and braced his shoulder against the door's edge just long enough to buy inches. Vesper did something that looked almost impossible. He planted himself sideways at the exact point where the gap remained widest, body low, vest brushing steel, acting as a living wedge without panic. The Malinois' muscles trembled with controlled strain, ears still forward, eyes still focused, as if he had decided that discipline mattered more than instinct. Wyatt saw it and felt something like faith, not supernatural, not mystical, just the hard belief that loyalty can become leverage when nothing else is left. "Now," Wyatt said. Nadine shoved the evidence bag through first. Harlan squeezed after it, scraping his shoulder, grimacing but moving. Darren followed, breath ragged. Vesper held one heartbeat longer, then slid through with a smooth twist of his body, vest barely clearing as the blast door sealed with a final metallic thud that echoed down the corridor like judgment. For a second, no one moved. Then Wyatt exhaled and kept going. They took Darren's maintenance route back, climbed the stairwell, and emerged into the cold blue twilight where the lake wind hit their faces like a blessing and an insult. Above ground, headlights swept through trees. Sheriff Delaney's cruiser sat angled across the access road, engine running, lights off but presence loud. Delaney stood beside it, square and steady, his weathered face set, mustache tight, hands relaxed, but ready. Across from him, Graham Sutter had finally stepped out of the shadows into flesh. 46, clean-shaven, hair dark and neatly combed. A sharp, angular face that looked manufactured for boardrooms, eyes calm and cold like glass. He wore a charcoal overcoat over dark layers, immaculate even out here, as if dirt was something other people carried. 2 contractors hovered behind him, neutral jackets, hands empty but posture trained. Graham's voice was the same as it had been on the speaker, polite, confident. Sheriff, he said as if they were old friends. This is an employee matter. Delaney didn't budge. This is my county, he replied evenly. Graham's gaze flicked past Delaney, landing on Wyatt and then on Harlan Fitch, and something tightened behind his politeness, a fraction of irritation. Mr. Halden, Graham said, as if resuming a paused conversation, you are escalating a situation that can be resolved quietly. Delaney stepped half a pace, blocking the line. Not tonight, he said. The sound that followed was not a threat. It was the rumble of arriving consequence. Tires on gravel, multiple vehicles, then the sharp white of floodlights cutting through trees. Agent Marisol Vega arrived with a small convoy, 2 government SUVs and a hazmat truck. Vega stepped out with the kind of economy that made even tired men straighten. 39, dark hair pulled into a low bun, face composed and sharp, eyes scanning in quick, precise measurements. Her field jacket was dark, practical, minimal logo. Her boots were built for rough ground, not appearances. She held a folder in one hand and a radio in the other, and she did not look at Graham first. She looked at the scene like a problem to be solved with law and procedure. Sheriff Delaney, she said, voice calm. Then her eyes settled on Wyatt, on Nadine's sealed evidence bag, on Harlan Fitch's ID badge. Agent Marisol Vega, she said, displaying credentials without drama. We have grounds and we have a warrant. Graham's polite mask didn't crack, but it thinned. This is private infrastructure, he began. Vega cut him off gently, which was worse than anger. Not anymore, she said. Hazmat personnel moved in behind her, suits half on, face shields ready, not rushing, just establishing control. Nadine approached Vega and handed over the sealed evidence with hands that didn't shake. Harlan Fitch stepped forward, wrists red from ties, shoulders squared despite exhaustion. I was detained, he said, voice hoarse but clear. I was coerced to sign a false report. Delaney's jaw tightened, and for the first time Graham's eyes showed a flash of calculation. Vesper stood beside Wyatt, alert and steady, facing the same direction as the seal, tail low but calm. Wyatt didn't speak much, he didn't need to. The proof was bagged, the witness was alive. The law had arrived with paperwork instead of bullets. Later, when dawn arrived early the way it always did up here, the lake looked the same, still and beautiful, but the air felt cleaner because the lie had been pulled out of the ground and placed under light. The facility was sealed under federal control. Nadine's samples went into proper labs. Darren was placed into protective custody before fear could swallow him again. Harlan Fitch, shaken but unbroken, gave his formal statement while still wearing the same rumpled suit that had become a symbol of how easily truth could be held hostage. The summer festival still happened because towns survive by insisting on normalcy, but this time the normal included accountability. Wyatt returned to the cabin only when it was safe to do so, and he sat on the porch in the early light, uniform still crisp, expression calm and composed, eyes no longer searching for the next threat. Vesper lay beside his boots, chin on paws, dark amber eyes half-lidded, a working dog finally allowed to rest. The lake glimmered beyond the trees. The north didn't cheer. It simply remained, quiet, bright, and clean enough to believe in again. Sometimes miracles are not loud. Sometimes God moves through quiet loyalty, steady courage, and one decision to do what is right when it would be easier to look away. In this story, the miracle was not the fortress beneath the ground. It was the moment truth mattered more than comfort, the loyalty of a dog that refused to back down, and the strength to protect an innocent life. Most of us will never face a hidden tunnel or powerful people trying to silence the truth. But we will face smaller tests every day, stay quiet or speak up, protect comfort or protect what is right, walk away or stand firm. Those moments are where faith becomes real, and where God can give us the courage to choose integrity. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope. Comment and tell us which moment stayed with you the most, and what you would have done in Wyatt's place. Subscribe to K9 and Seal Stories so you do not miss the next story. May God bless you, protect your home, and guide your steps. When your own life is tested, may He give you strength, wisdom, and peace.